Hi there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to do another quilt in a day. This is made out of leftovers from my friend's Halloween quilts. So I made her two quilt tops with panels, and I'll put a link here for that. But we had a lot of leftover fabric and some of it was so cute, so I made another quilt top in a day. Actually, I'm going to say it took about a total of 5 hours. So not bad. And come along and I'll show you what I did. So here are all the leftovers from the first two panel quilts, and there was a lot more left over than I expected. My idea for making this quilt out of the leftovers was to do 10-inch squares on point. My first step was to see how many 10-inch squares I could actually get out of this fabric. After I listed all the various fabrics and how many 10-inch squares I could make, I got out a piece of paper and drew myself a little grid. Here you can see I'm using the diagonal line on my ruler, lining up that diagonal line with the top of my rectangle, and that gives me 45-degree squares. And I'm using a 1-inch square to represent each 10-inch fabric square. Next, I numbered the squares in each row. Since I wanted all the sides to be the same, I went ahead and extended that top a little bit so I could draw a line across where the point would be. My next step was to take colored pencils and color in squares according to the fabrics that I had. I had 3 different orange fabrics that I used. I alternated them when I put the quilt top together. And the total squares involved are 40 10-inch squares needed. My next step was cutting out 10-inch squares according to my needs. Last, I cut 3.5-inch strips for a border out of this multicolored fabric, and then I cut 2.5-inch strips so I would have binding ready to go when it was time to finish this quilt. As you will see in this assembly part, my map of my quilt top was never far from my side. I simply started sewing pairs together according to my map, and then pairs would be stitched together into rows, and then completed rows would be joined to other rows. After separating that first round of pairs, I started stitching rows together. So I took the first 2 rows and I matched that with my map, and I'm pointing at the fabrics according to my map, making sure I am going to sew these to the right colored squares. For all these joinings, I will be using extensive pinning to make sure that my seam lines do line up. One thing you'll notice in these video clips, my map is getting folded back and clipped, so I only see the 2 rows I'm working on at the time. That made it a lot easier to pin these correctly. Before I sewed the rows together, I did double check every single time to make sure it was matching up with my map. And here's an example of why you want to double check before you stitch. In this case, my row 3 and 4, I pinned them incorrectly. I should have pinned it on the other side, so the colors did not match up the way I chose. But thankfully, it is a lot easier to repin something than it is to take all the stitches out and re-stitch it. And here's what this top looks like before trimming and borders. And I'll definitely be using the scraps of these triangles that I'm going to trim off in a future project. So to trim off my extra triangles on the edges, I lined up my ruler so that the point was showing through my ruler, and I was cutting a 1/4 inch beyond that because I know I'm going to be sewing on a border and I need to allow for that extra 1/4 inch. And I did want my points to show as much as possible. And after trimming, we have some nice straight edges to work with to sew to the border. My next step was to sew my border pieces together. Then I trimmed off these selvage edges and pressed those border seams to the one side. And again, I used extensive pinning my border to the top and the bottom of my quilt first, and then I did the sides. Here is that finished quilt top with the borders. I think it turned out super cute. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.